Hello, everyone. My name is Diane Reeford, and I'm here on behalf of the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association. And I want to introduce you to three people who truly are experts in their field, just like you, only different unless you're an epidemiologist or a virus hunter or a vet turned MD. Viruses are their bread and butter, so to speak, and in the next 3/4 of an hour, they hope to answer a lot of your questions about viruses and vaccines. In particular, the virus of our global pandemic and several sorts of vaccines now being used or still in development that we all hope will lead us swiftly to that light of wellness and normalcy that we expect to be at the end of the tunnel. And most importantly, these three people have your concerns in mind. This chat is for rural Canadians, but don't leave if you're in an urban area. We're all in this together. So let's get started. Cynthia Carr is an epidemiologist based in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She has more than 25 years of experience of crafting and delivering public health messages based on good science. Also from Winnipeg is Richard Ross. Wait. Richard is a veterinarian turned MD who knows viruses and vaccines from both sides. He works with farmers and agricultural businesses to keep us all healthy. And based at the University of Alberta in Edmonton, David Marchant is a prof and Canada Research Chair in basically how viruses work and vaccines and therapies fight. So thank you. Thank you to the three of you. The COVID-19 virus is definitely top of mind right now, but before we talk more about that and how to fight it, let's step back a little bit and talk about what viruses are, how they attack, and what our body does to fight back. David, would you like to start with that one?
Well, yeah, sure. Viruses are, the technical term is they're obligate intracellular parasites. They're basically just nucleic acid, DNA or RNA, that's encapsulated in a fatty envelope that finds its way into your cells, and its sole purpose is to just replicate, produce more copies of its nucleic acid, and then have those bud off and infect surrounding cells. So their only goal is to replicate and produce more of itself. And what happens is we produce an immune response to tackle that, and the immune response can cause disease and direct infection. The mere replication of viruses causes disease. It destroys the cell frequently when it infects, and it destroys tissue. And then along comes the immune response. The only way our immune response can tackle virus infection is by killing those cells that are infected. So we destroy our own tissues. And as we've seen with SARS-CoV-2, we mount an immune response to the massive amount of infection we get in the lungs, and that destroys lung tissue that is required to exchange gases between the blood and air.
We hear people say, "Oh no, the virus doesn't discriminate." We always put a human face on this virus that we're fighting, but they've been around a long time too, haven't they?
Yeah. The viruses have been around as long as life has been around, for probably 3.5 billion years, as long as there's been life on planet Earth. Herpes viruses have been around probably 500 million years. They parasitized the neural nets in the first being on Earth that ever had a nervous system, the jellyfish. And so the ancestor of the cold sore on your lips probably started in a jellyfish, in parasitizing their neural nets.
Oh my gosh.
So fascinating little things, viruses.
Yeah. And Richard, as a veterinarian and an MD, boy, you've seen viruses for a while.
Yeah. So just as important as viruses are to us and our health, they can be devastating to animals. And so we see that and the physiology and the disease process is exactly the same within animals, and we've recognized that, and so within the agricultural industry, we use very similar methods of combating. In the agricultural industry, we actually focus on a prevention, because you know that if you end up getting like BVD or so bovine viral diarrhea, for instance, you're going to end up with an abortion storm, and so you're actually ahead of the game because you don't want that in. So every year you go in and you do your vaccinations, things like that. So you focus on prevention to maintain your production, things like that. So it works just the same as with us, but with humans, we tend often, well, at least with the COVID, we one step behind. So the whole question today is, how can we get one step ahead dealing with this whole pandemic?
Cynthia, how can we do that?
Well, certainly, we've been talking for over a year now about the importance of distancing and keeping our groups small. But really right now, our most important layer of protection to add as a tool to combat this virus globally is participation in vaccination. And we do understand that there are fears that people have about vaccine, and we'd like to talk to you about that. And I can start a little bit if you'd like me to.
Well, I think I'd first like to go to David and just talk a little bit about how vaccines work, but keep that in mind. We sure do want to talk about that. David, how do they work?
Well, so vaccines really, they prime the immune system. And how they do that is we take a little bit of the pathogen that we want to protect ourselves from, and we inject that with a little bit of I guess like a trigger, or like an immune tickler, like called an adjuvant, that says, hey, we want you to mount an immune response to this antigen from this deadly pathogen. The first being smallpox, and because the immune system has a memory, it remembers how to protect you from pathogens. So it's important to vaccinate so that you can develop a rapid immune response that is memorized, so that when you get infected, you rapidly clear the pathogen. And so why that's important is because it typically takes 2 weeks to develop this immune memory or proper immune response through vaccination or an infection. Now, many infections, however, unfortunately, will kill you before the 2 week period of developing a good, robust immune response has taken place. And so it's better to develop this robust immune response prior to getting the infection, and we do that through vaccination.
Now, when you talk about the 2 week period, in the vaccine that we're most interested in right now, a lot of people have had one shot, not enough, but they're now worried about their second dose. How worried do we need to be about that?
I'm not worried about getting a second dose. I'm looking forward to getting a second dose. Mind you, a recent study in the United States showed that those with one dose, there's 60% were protected from infection, whereas with 2 doses, you have greater than 90% protection. So there is protection provided by one dose, but you get optimal protection from the second one. And the reason we get more than one dose is something called affinity maturation. So the more we get infected by a pathogen, the better the response becomes. Mm-hmm. And this is why 2, maybe even 3 or 4 rounds or doses would be really ideal, because every time we get infected or we get vaccine booster, affinity maturation takes place, and we get better binding antibodies. We get better responses of our T cells, which fight infection. So that's why it's important to get that second dose, because it just makes the immune response that much stronger against the invading pathogen.
Richard, I bet you're thinking about animals and how this works the same, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
so you think about our kids. We're giving them a whole lot in that first year, 2 years, but it's exactly the same for your heifers. You're going to for sure make sure that all of them have to come through the chute twice to get their second booster, so that the following year you only have to be vaccinating them once. The piece that is often missed with animal versus human is we have to admit there's a cost component with on the animal side. So that's why we could potentially create that 95% worth of immunity, but at what cost? So that's why usually you would use 2 shots in the herd, or in the swine herd or cattle herd, and that would be more than enough. So exactly the same with us, at least with our kids, for some of these vaccines that we use for multiple times. That's because these have been devastating diseases in the past, and we have now found a way to pretty close to eradicate them. That would obviously be a fantastic goal at some point.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that the livestock producers that you're talking about who use these vaccines are pretty accustomed to accepting the safety of them, but that's not necessarily the case right now. And I want to move to, well, Richard, I know you've got an opinion on that too, and then we'll move to Cynthia.
Yeah. Well, I mean, safety, there's definitely going to be a little bit of a difference. I think the one thing that we do forget is that at the end of the day, any of these companies, so Merck or Boehringer or Janssen & Janssen or Pfizer, all of these companies at the end of the day are here for making a profit. And so if they produce something that's unsafe, we've seen that with Janssen & Janssen, where it wasn't unsafe, but the perception was that it was unsafe. So if you end up using a vaccine and you vaccinate all your heifers and then they all abort, you will never use that vaccine again, okay? And you will tell all your friends. So safety is actually the same. It's driven by different methods in the animal industry versus the human industry, but safety is still imperative from all of these companies.
Cynthia, you're nodding your head.
Well, right. And just building on what Richard said, the truth is that a vaccine, a treatment, or a test that nobody trusts is of no use to anyone. So all of these companies have worked together to follow, stringent and adhere to clinical trials guidelines. But we do understand that there are concerns, and some of the major fears are, gee, this seems like it happened awfully fast. We don't have any long-term data on this. How do we know that it's safe in the long term? And then, of course, speaking of safety, the safety signals that we're hearing about as this rolls out to over 1 billion people now in the world in real time. So if I were just to quickly go through the concept of too fast, this is an enormous advancement in science. The previous fastest vaccine to market was about 4 years with the mumps, and it took about a year for this. But how did that happen? It didn't happen by cutting safety corners. It happened with money. So what happened was at least $10 billion was provided to some of the major vaccine manufacturers so that they didn't wait to start manufacturing the product. All of the supply chain, all of the materials, generally a company will wait to go through the clinical trials to get approval before they'll put a penny into that. What happened was the companies were told, We will give you this. We will pre-buy doses anyway, even if they all have to be discarded. But we need this to happen in parallel, not step one, phase 1 clinical trial where you're testing the body to see if antibodies are developed and there's any safety risks. And then the phase 2 and 3 clinical trials in the population where they were looking for actual signals of illness. And people also need to understand that another company had the data, not Pfizer, not Moderna. So before the clinical trial started, they said, when we get to 150 people that are symptomatically ill, let us know, and then you tell us how many were in the placebo group, how many were in the vaccine group. So the companies did not know, and they were as delighted and surprised as anyone to hear these efficacies of 94, 95% efficacy rate in terms of the difference between symptomatic illness in the placebo and the vaccine group. So the speed did not mean that it wasn't safe. It just meant it could come to market and there was less risk for the vaccine company to get that manufacturing process up and running. And then just quickly, no long-term data. That's true. You know, this is an evolving situation. We've only had these vaccines in place for as long as clinical trials started, but those people in the clinical trials are followed for even longer than most people. We know that 99% of impacts from a vaccine occur within 6 weeks. Most occur much quicker. So people are followed longer. And every time you do hear of a rare side effect or a rare impact, remember, this is out of over 1 billion people. AstraZeneca is being used in 140 countries. Pfizer in 90 countries. These are used globally. So when you hear about these safety signals, remember that's a sign that the system is working, that information is being collected, being shared, and so that if there are serious issues, we stop, we understand who's impacted, and we make a plan.
But I can see people thinking, oh, that's all very well, but if it happened to me, you know?
Well, if it happened to you, absolutely. But 3% is our known incidence rate of people that are infected with COVID. People then, a portion of those end up in the hospital, end up dying. And don't forget what we're learning more and more about people that even have mild illness that David was telling us more about last night, that have long-term chronic illness from head to toe, because this virus impacts us in our cardiac system and our respiratory system. So don't underestimate the risk of COVID-19.
David, what do you say to that?
Yeah, very right. Don't forget that all-cause mortality, supposedly not associated with COVID-2, went up by 10-12% over a 2-month period in the United States between March and May 2020. They recorded an extra 150,000 deaths, up to 750,000. And what we're learning from COVID-2 is how insidious it is. The vast majority of people don't even know they're sick. They don't know they're positive. And looking at human hearts from people who died in auto accidents, we looked at the ones that were determined to be SARS-CoV-2 after the fact. They didn't die as a result of their COVID-2. They probably didn't even know they had it. We find these little, what are called microemboli in the hearts of these people, and they're scattered and littered throughout the hearts. We see that in the ferret model of SARS-CoV-2, where there's no overt symptoms due to COVID-2 infection, but we're seeing these microinfarcts. An infarct is part of tissue that it's been occluded by an embolism or a clot, so that oxygenated blood can't get to it, so that the tissue dies. And this is what causes a heart attack, is if you get enough of dead heart tissue as a result of a blood clot in the heart, you have a heart attack. And we're seeing these microemboli throughout the hearts of people and animals that didn't know they were infected. So it's a really insidious infection, and it's bloody dangerous. And I experienced this myself when, I run 10 kilometers, 4 to 5 times a week. And, my time's pretty good, around 45 minutes. That's not bad for a guy in his mid 40s. I like to think so anyway. So I'm 2 minutes into my run, and it was like blue screen of death on a PC. I blacked out before I even hit the ground. And I went to emergency. They did a heart workup. They couldn't kind of find anything wrong. Thought maybe I was just a little dehydrated. And then 3 days later, I started to get a sore throat and said, "Oh, okay, Leanne, hey, I run a virology lab." Our lab director, I said, "Hey, we got to test me for SARS-CoV-2." And yes, indeedy duty, I was quite positive for the second time, actually. So it's a bloody infectious virus. It's burned through probably half the population in 1 year. It'll get through the other half, I'm sure, in the coming months. And it does really insidious, dangerous things to the body that we are just starting to understand, and we're unveiling every month through biomedical research. So it's important to get the vaccine because one blood clot in 100,000 is and if someone dies of that, that's tragic, yes. But the death rate and the due to this insidious infection is far worse, and the secondary effects and the long COVID syndromes and the like is just devastating. And if we can get a vaccine to prevent this, that's important. And what I think should be mentioned is that we now know about these blood clots found in typically one in 100,000, 2 or 3 in a million vaccinated cases. As physicians are able to recognize the symptoms of these, the mortality rate will go down and morbidity will go down, because we have ways of treating blood clots with heparin and antiplatelet drugs and just a real barrage of different medications to treat these things.
Thank you, David. Cynthia, I know the goal is vaccination, the vaccines we have, and we're going to talk a little bit about that, but why do we do it? What are we going for?
Well, at the end of the day, we want COVID-19 to become a preventable illness. So, by stages, we want to hopefully prevent transmission. Now, the clinical trial looked at symptomatic disease, but ideally you prevent transmission, but also along that spectrum, as long as the vaccines hold to prevent the most severe illnesses and death, that is the most important. And that is still occurring even with the variants of concern, but it's why it's even more important that, we move beyond a third of Canadians, adults being vaccinated, and continue to participate and not let our guard down. And it's much harder to catch up than to prevent. As Richard said in the beginning, we need to focus on prevention of illness. And, we say, well, how much data is there out there to show about all of these levels of prevention? Well, right now, let's just look at some trends in Israel. Look at from January, where they started powering through vaccinating the population. All you have to do is look at the graph, and it does this. In epidemiology, that's not common. We're used to seeing kind of wobbling. It's doing this. United Kingdom's doing this. But what happened was they kept those layers of protection in place while they rolled out the vaccine program. They didn't do as, unfortunately, in India, let go of many layers of protection well before anybody was vaccinated. And now you've got just sort of exponential spread. So let's look at that real life data that really does show a prevention and transmission, as well as I heard recently that Ontario, there have been 4 long-term care resident deaths in the month of April. Remember the tragedy last spring in Ontario? That's where we focused our initial vaccine efforts. Look at the results. So there's lots of short-term successes, and the long-term goal is let's make this a preventable illness.
A preventable illness. Richard, do you think it's possible?
Well, to be honest, it's nice to dream. if we look, there definitely have been viral diseases, both in the human and animal world, that have become that we've actually eradicated thanks to vaccines. So smallpox, rinderpest for animals, although that's not necessarily an issue here in Canada. It'll be a reportable disease, but I don't think we've ever had cases here. But so that's eradicated, but preventable, yes, I'm sure we can, but the whole thing is hinging around herd immunity. So as farmers, we understand herd immunity, and that's because we work with herds all the time. On a human side, we use that word, but that is very difficult. If you look at our numbers for trying to create herd immunity for influenza, we don't get there. I mean, public health tears its hair out every single year because we are desperate to get to 30% vaccination rates, and we never get there. Never. It's very, very sad. So that may affect our R0, and I'll leave that to Cynthia to talk about R0. But for actual making this a really preventable disease, we are probably going to need to get well above our 50% of herd immunity, and within a agricultural setting, we will frequently go close to 100%. So that's why you can truly create herd immunity in an agricultural setting, and we see the clear benefits of that. To try and get the herd of humans to actually follow suit, there's a whole lot of other pieces, and a lot of it is actually, it's based here, and very sadly it's based around fear and misunderstanding, and so hopefully through more discussion we can address some of that today.
So what do we do, David? What do we do to, maybe we have to change that name, herd.
Yeah.
Maybe none of us like to be called that, but what do we do?
Well,
How to persuade?
I think you have to remind the people of what happens when you have poliovirus outbreaks, when you have to close down. You have to keep kids indoors throughout the summer because of poliovirus, and images of kids on iron lungs or people on ventilators. The city of Edmonton here, where the University of Alberta is, they had a very good vaccination campaign where they proved quite effective because vaccination rates went up, and they put on the sides of buses and in bus stops, images of people on ventilators and iron lungs, and people wearing masks in 1918 during the flu pandemic. I think just constant public information campaigns and reminders of what happens during pandemics and the toll, the human toll they take, and the deaths that occur.
You mentioned the flu, and definitely I can see some of those images, but this is very different from flu, Cynthia.
It is very different from flu. Originally we thought this is the 7th of the coronaviruses, 4 of which cause about 1 in 4 common colds every year. And then some of you may remember SARS, and then MERS, which is a virus circulating in the Middle East, but doesn't appear to have left, thank goodness, because it has a high mortality rate. So what is very different, and what has already been alluded to or discussed by David, is that extent of asymptomatic spread. And boy, did we wish we knew this in the beginning. Half or more of cases, it is estimated, are related to asymptomatic spread. Not only that, but you're most infectious in that 2 to 3 days before you even have symptom onset. So think about how easy it is for well-meaning people that don't feel sick at all to pass this around. And the more we move around, the more we pass it. Influenza, it's yucky. It hits us hard. It hits us fast. We're in bed. We're out. We're not interacting. We know we're sick. That's part of the benefit of those symptoms for public health. We also thought in the beginning that this was a respiratory virus. Influenza is, coronavirus tends to be respiratory. We've learned along the way, as has been discussed, this is a virus that impacts our whole body, our circulatory system, taking our blood around our whole body, as well as our respiratory system. It's a very complicated disease that impacts everywhere in our body. And just think, we've talked about there's barely any flu this year anywhere in the world, and we've attributed a great deal of that to public health messaging and staying apart. Think about how tenacious this virus is, that all of that impact on influenza, if it is all of the public health measures, coronavirus is still thriving.
Oh, I'm getting more and more scared as we talk. And so there is a vaccine now. There are many vaccines. What makes these vaccines so special? David?
Well, they're mRNA vaccines. And so we're using, what they do is they use the natural mechanism that our cells all use to make proteins. And that's from mRNA. Our proteins read the DNA that's encoded in the nuclei of all our cells and make mRNA, messenger RNA, from the DNA. And we make proteins from that mRNA. So what Moderna first did was they found a way of getting mRNA that they'd made artificially into cells. And what we have to remember is that these mRNA vaccines have been around for over 10 years. We've had the liposomal technologies to get them get the mRNA into cells. And this was the biggest hurdle in the early 2000s. And they figured out how to do it with this liposomal technology. And what we have to remember is that for the last 10 years, they've been doing clinical trials in humans with these mRNA vaccines. So they had a very good safety profile leading up to the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's how they were able to, I guess, pivot so quickly. Moderna, before the pandemic, were trying these mRNA vaccines in clinical trials against Zika virus and influenza. And so it really didn't take much to pivot the whole program to COVID-19. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I was taken aback. I didn't expect there to be a vaccination for years, but indeed there it was within a few months. I was astounded.
Now they're not all mRNA though. mRNA, right? And
well,
so
it's the delivery that differs. One uses an adenovirus,
right,
to deliver that another virus to combat a virus. We put the mRNA into the virus, and the virus injects it into the cells. Right. Or we use just mRNA technology with the mRNA encapsulated in like a fatty envelope that gets into the cells.
But there are other vaccines that do not use this, and we're being told that we take the first vaccine, but some people are perhaps not right there. What do you think, Richard?
Well, as we've already discussed, I mean, there's a lot of virus already circulating out just in general public. We have these public health measures that we automatically came up with. Public health has used these for ages. I remember being involved in the H1 pandemic and how, yes, it took longer to even get an influenza vaccine, and yet we had some control with the public health measures. So distancing and washing and using masks, things like that, usually they work, okay, relatively well. But we need something else. And so that's where your vaccine comes in. In some outbreaks, like for instance with encephalitis, we also within public health, we'll have a different tool called treatment for prevention. Okay, so then with encephalitis, because it's a bacteria, we can use antibiotics. We don't have that in this setting. And so that's why we've got masses of virus out there. And so you need to grab that tool that's going to be the most effective. And as I talked about herd immunity way back, we've got a long way to go. And at least there are some countries that have shown fine, 50% is a good number. But some of the projections have indicated we probably need to be closer to 70%. And let alone, we won't even try and compare ourselves to agricultural production, where we go closer to the 100%. Okay, so as the first vaccine that you can get access to is going to start that whole pathway. There's quite a few studies out there, mix and match studies, that it's going to be really interesting. But if you think about it, within the swine industry, we mix and match vaccines, actually coronavirus vaccines as well. We mix and match them already. So are we going to be able to find a safe mix and match out of the vaccines we have? I wouldn't be surprised. I think we probably will, but we want those safety profiles up there. So let's at least start with that first one to try and control the amount of virus that's out there. Because each person that gets vaccinated, potentially you're not going to be spreading it to 2 people. Okay, because automatically, if you get sick, the likelihood of you spreading it to 2 people is pretty good. It's actually a mathematical equation. It's fantastic, really.
And it's quite shocking when you look at just the efficacy or the impact of bringing that reproduction rate down below 1 versus just 2. You're looking at, in 4 weeks, potentially thousands of cases versus tens. And just a quick example from Israel, they were at a peak of 10,000 cases a day at one point. Now they're having days of less than 150 cases. Like, the exponential decrease is as shocking as the exponential increase. But if we use the tools and the layers of protection, and we don't, lose our vigilance and lose our sense of urgency, because looks like, these viruses, they really like fall and winter. We've got to get control of this in the next few months as we get more and more vaccine being delivered to Canada. Now is our opportunity. We don't want to see another flare up again in the fall and winter.
Any vaccine.
Any vaccine, and trust the transparency
Yeah.
of our healthcare system. It is not unusual for a treatment or a vaccine even to not be the best for certain segments of the population. That's what we're learning. And it may be, maybe don't take AstraZeneca if you're a female within this age group for this reason, or for whatever other reasons. Don't take this influenza virus if you're allergic to, or vaccine if you're allergic to eggs. It's not unusual that one size doesn't fit all. That's the beauty of having the money. We're blessed in Canada that we've been able to secure many different types of vaccine, both in terms of the supply chain, but also in terms of having options to pivot and be able to get more information out there. So think of it as, if you're offered this dose, trust, if you're not sure, talk to your doctor, but don't wait. Don't wait thinking I want something better.
When will there be a vaccine for kids? David?
Well, they're doing the trials now. Actually, the trials have been completed, haven't they? And
we're hearing.
Few days, I think. I think we're awaiting that announcement from Health Canada.
Well,
right?
that's teenagers. What about younger ones too?
Younger ones, they got to do the trials, I guess.
Yeah, so they start with sort of they start with the older and move down. And they have just started actually so the Moderna also is wrapping up their 12 to 17s. And as David said, for Pfizer, they've completed the safety and impact of the studies. The clinical trial, we're waiting, we think, within the next week for approval. And then now Moderna is actually looking at the younger age groups. But again, we have to think about prioritizing what was the disease impact. So this is all good news, but it doesn't mean that kids will change in priority. We'll wait and watch that, but it's just that ongoing good news about the impact of these vaccines across the spectrum of age groups.
the word trust comes up. We have to trust all this, don't we? How do you guys know you're right?
It's statistics. There's always a certain level of doubt. When you're looking at such large numbers, the billions vaccinated and the numbers out of the billions vaccinated who get the odd blood clot, those, because the numbers are so large, there's a large level of certainty as to what the safety profile of these things is. If it was just 10 people vaccinated and one person may or may not have got a clot, you just don't know. But because we're working with such large numbers, there's a lot of certainty and very little doubt with regard to the safety profile. Something I do just want to mention quickly is, there's always bias and personal bias when it comes to the news. And I know that I got my AstraZeneca vaccine, and I was reading, I've been reading the news about clots and things, and it always crosses your mind, oh, I got a little bit of a headache here. Is that a stroke? I don't know, and I don't think so. But even as scientists, we're supposed to be objective and non-biased, but we get caught up in media hype and going on, and when they concentrate on that one little thing that that may come up once every 100,000, 200,000 cases, it crosses your mind. It makes you think twice, and that's natural for people to go, well, I did read in the news that this can happen or that can happen as a result of this, so I don't know. And it's that point you talk to your physician, and they'll go over the risks with you. So I didn't have to. I just I got the last dose available, and Uber couldn't get me there fast enough, so I took an Uber XL and paid the extra money because I really wanted to get that vaccine. I have A negative blood. There's a good possibility I've had it 3 times. I've had it at least twice, COVID-2, where we picked it up by PCR, and I didn't hesitate.
What do you want us to remember from this discussion, Richard?
We, over a year into this, we know for sure there's a lot of COVID fatigue. And we see that being manifest in multiple ways. And as clinicians, as physicians, we get that. And I've had multiple patients come in, and we just sit and talk honestly, because they need to unload. This is hard. This is hard on everybody. This isn't, people say, oh yes, the health industry is getting hit and they're the frontline people. Oh, no. This is hard on everyone. Okay. And so I fully understand that COVID fatigue is getting us down, and especially when like David said, we have all this conflicting media. Okay, that just adds to it. It makes us uncertain and scared. Okay, but we also know that there are limited tools, okay, and so when one comes along, we have to grab onto that. And I'm not sure what is the strongest argument. Do you play the whole safety card, look at the numbers, look at the statistics? That's completely valid. I think for an agricultural community, they also understand money, because their livelihood is often thanks to vaccinations. And so using that as an example, there's lots of reasons why vaccines are safe and valid. And so that is probably the most important thing I want people to remember. Get in there, take that first shot when you can, and when that second one's available, we'll get it up. And then that way, ultimately, our herd immunity is going to be at a point where we are all in this together and we can actually get this to become a preventable disease. Will we have to be vaccinated every year? Let's see. We thinking so, probably. But it starts with that first shot.
David, last word for you?
Yeah, I mean, when students ask me about the safety of vaccines and the like, I say, well, look, be careful to look both ways before crossing the street, because you're far more likely to get into a car accident or get injured mowing the lawn than get injured from the vaccine. And one last thing, if we could at all possibly outlaw the term new normal, new normal, straight to jail.
Got it. Cynthia?
Just like the farmers in Canada are working tirelessly always to provide us with healthy and safe food for our well-being. Remember that the scientists, the physicians, public health educators, we're also not perfect, but we're also working tirelessly as well, and trying to work together globally so that we can get through this and appreciate all of the efforts of the agricultural industry. And I hope that some of this information we brought today might alleviate some stress, might answer some questions, or might generate some more questions. Questions are always good. Conspiracy theories are not. They're not helpful. So I just hope that we've maybe generated some helpful conversation, and that we express how much we appreciate the work that's done by our Canadian farmers and people in this industry.
Thank you to all three of you for a wonderful discussion. Cynthia Carr, Richard Rusk, David Marchant. I'm Diane Reifert for the Canadian Agricultural Safety Association, and you can check out CASA's website at CASA, so it's CASA-ACSA.ca, and click on the COVID-19 to hear this chat again. Be well.